As the sender of a message, it's your responsibility to make sure that it was received and understood by the other person. The first time I heard this idea was well into my corporate career in a project management certification class. The instructor was very adamant about this, but I was less sure. Isn't there some responsibility for the person receiving the message to be a good listener and try to understand? While that's true, of all of the elements of the communication cycle, you can only take control of your own actions. It's in your best interest to take responsibility for confirming that the receiver is understood and that the message wasn't intercepted by noise. The communication cycle is one of the foundations of communication knowledge, but you may or may not have learned it in school. It impacts your everyday interactions. In order for communication to occur, there must be both a sender and a receiver. The message is sent using a communication channel. Also present is feedback, or the lack of feedback, and noise. It's often the noise you cannot hear that blocks your message from being received. George Bernard Shaw understood this. He's famously quoted for saying, "The single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it's taken place." Today I'm sharing 4 types of noise that can interfere with your message and some ways to get feedback and make sure that it got through. Noise is anything that disrupts your message between you and the receiver. When people hear the word noise, they often think of physical noise. And physical noise is when there's an external interruption to the message. If I'm presenting in a conference call and someone's dog is in the background barking loudly, that will disrupt attention and the receivers will have a hard time receiving my message. Physical noise is obvious to both the sender and the receiver. The fact that the message has been disrupted is known by both parties, and another attempt at sending it can be made. The meeting host will mute the line of the offending party. But there are other types of noise that disrupt the communication cycle, and those are more dangerous because oftentimes the sender doesn't even realize that they're happening. Physiological noise is when the receiver is experiencing a biological circumstance that's impacting their ability to receive the message. Imagine you have a toothache and you're in need of a root canal. Your nerves are very sensitive, and every breath is a shock of pain that just radiates in your jaw. What's the likelihood that you'll be able to focus on a message? Probably pretty low. As the sender, there isn't anything you can do about physiological noise. You could have personal insights about the person that you're speaking with that would help you understand if this type of noise exists, but otherwise, you just need to understand that it's a possibility. Semantic noise is when there isn't shared language between the sender and receiver. As the sender, this is the type of noise that you have the most direct control over because you can adjust your message to reduce semantic noise. Spell out acronyms, avoid jargon, give one-sentence descriptions to describe things, even things that you thought you knew the receiver would have known. Another big watch item is workisms. A workism is a word or phrase that becomes a popular expression in a professional business settings. Things like move the needle, low-hanging fruit. These are only helpful if all of the receivers have a shared understanding about what they mean. Psychological noise is when the receiver has preconceived biases and assumptions. This type of noise is always present. Humans interpret messages through the lens of our background and experience with the subject and the people involved. Successful communicators ask strong questions to both understand more about the other person's perspective and to open them up to receiving new messages. So we've talked about the 4 types of noise: physical, physiological, semantic, and psychological. But what are you to do as a communicator to make sure that that noise isn't intercepting your message? Feedback from the receiver is the only way to be sure that you've successfully communicated something. Feedback can come in many forms. Body language, including facial expression, nodding your head, crossing your arms, are all forms of feedback that help us to assess if the message got through. Verbal encouragements like, yeah, I see, helps us to know that the message is being understood. In our remote meeting culture, when nobody has their camera on, there are times when you get no feedback from the receivers at all. It's like you're talking into an abyss. When this happens, don't let the moment pass and assume that your message was understood. Remember, it's your responsibility as the sender to make sure that the message got through. You need to solicit feedback. Build a list of questions that you can ask to get the feedback that you need. Don't be afraid to ask people by name for their response if they're being particularly quiet. You can also use tools like chat as a way to get feedback in larger group settings where people are less comfortable speaking up. Some people might call this kind of information basic, but it's foundational. Understanding the communication cycle, the different kinds of noise that exist and how they block your message, as well as what to do about it, are critical concepts to master so that you can communicate better at work and in life.